So when I say things like having the power of gods requires love and wisdom of gods, I think a lot of people, especially in the, Jordan Peterson kind of world, think that I'm going to try and do Jesus smuggling. And I'm not. I'm using that phrase in a symbolic way, not a literal way. And because it, I think, metaphorically or symbolically has insight that it offers. So I'm going to say a few more things that are taking a religious idea, and I'm not going to do Jesus smuggling. I'm simply saying that there was actually philosophic insight expressed through the religious tradition that has value. So the no false idols concept in the commandments, the way that I think of that, there's a few different ways, but the way I think of that is that a model of reality is not reality. And this is back to Asimov's ever righting of wrong, right? And this is back to that no consistent system will be complete. And when you even look at the definition of a complex system in complexity science, it's a system that when you model it means a finite set of variables and a finite set of transforms or algorithms, right? Which will predict some percentage, less than 100% of its behavior. So when you create a complicated model of a complex system, it still has some behavior not explained by the complicated system that we would describe as emergent properties. And if you add more variables, you might get closer to, you go from 80% accuracy to 85% accuracy or whatever, but you don't get 100% accuracy. So of course the Leibnizian idea is that 0.99999 indefinitely, you run the limit of it, equals 1. I think there's a fundamental philosophic problem here. This is numerically very useful. That it is numerically valuable to consider it as 1 versus is 1 is actually a really important distinction. So similarly, we see some correlation, we assume some causation, we see that as we add more variables, it gets closer. Therefore, we assume it is purely deterministic on a finite variable set that we have not understood all the variables of completely, but we're converging on perfect understanding. No. We're converging on statistically better understanding that will always continue to have unknown and gaps in it. And so given that biology and ecology and psychology and sociology and all the things that we really care about are, because I would say we only care about tools and infrastructure insofar as they affect those things. The things that we really care about are all complex systems, which the model of the complex system will never be the thing, right? It doesn't mean it's not useful. It can be totally useful. But also, if I make a model of a thing that doesn't describe its behavior perfectly, there's some emergent properties not described by the model, then if I optimize for the model, where the model doesn't map to the reality is where I fuck up the reality. And we see that all the time with very simplified economic models of rational human actors and, Malthusian insights and whatever. And reality doesn't follow the model perfectly, so it has some benefit and then some fucked up things, right? So then we try to make a slightly more complicated model. So the no false idols is that the model of reality is never reality, so don't ever get too attached to it. Don't ever get emotionally, religiously attached to capitalism or to communism or to a particular scientific understanding of a thing. Hold it as useful and maybe the best we currently have, and as fundamentally and inexorably inadequate. So there is a reverence for reality that is beyond current and ever description. And that reverence for reality has us seek to want to keep making better models while not being attached to our models, just saying they are relatively better than other models and inadequate. And we're pretty sure 1,000 years from now, we'll have much, much better models. And then 1,000 years from then again, right? So religion. I've been reading the founding fathers of this country letters to each other a lot lately, as I've been thinking about public education and the need for just an almost mind-blowing increase in what we would call public education. And one of the things they spoke to again and again, we can think this is an antiquated idea of a bunch of like old white dudes in a time where science hadn't advanced enough, and I really think that that is a mistaken assessment. They talked about the need for a religious education as being as critical as a education in the sciences and technology and trades and etc. And some of them said things like, I actually don't care if they're studying Confucius or Rumi or, whatever. it's that there needs to be a transcendental operator. There needs to be that whatever our current model is, we need to be able to have at least some frames for an intuitive connection to something that is beyond the limit of those frames. And so this is where I would say that, utilitarian ethics is necessary but not sufficient. Virtue ethics also serves a role, because in utilitarian ethics, first, if I take negative utilitarianism, I want to minimize suffering, then obviously the best way to do that is to just kill the universe. And I'll have the least area under the curve of suffering into the future. We can see that every one of the utilitarian theories, hypotheses, if I do a reductio ad absurdum, I can see that it doesn't actually further. And this is, again, one of these partial considerations of something more complex than the model can hold. And so in utilitarian calculus, I have to assume higher degree of epistemic certainty than I usually have when actually making choice, right? Because oftentimes I'm making a choice in not only the complex domain, but the anthrocomplex domain, the domain of humans interacting with lots of humans, interacting with biological systems, interacting with technological systems. And so what I'll end up doing is say, okay, the things that matter are these things, and the effect of this action is going to be this. And so I'm willing to have the ends justify the means, and I'll sacrifice some harm here for some greater good here. But so often I cannot actually say that that will be the greater good, that in terms of the effect of the action, that the harm will be limited in that way, that the benefits will be that, because the unknown set is so large. Now, I'm not doing a God of the gaps argument. I'm saying simply we can't predict the weather 10 days out. And so one of the places where people start to look at virtue ethics is, okay, where I don't have the epistemic certainty to just run a utilitarian calculus on a finite set of metrics, is there something that creates more integrity in the moment where then the next moment unfolds from greater integrity? And we can say that the way that people think about both utilitarian and virtue ethics are like, they're not even using deep enough cognitive tools. And, so we can, this is where I do think that the metaphysics is, a deepening of the cognitive tools that are being used. It's very interesting. So I think, religions were obviously, they were philosophers who were wise people who were having deep experiences and noticing humanity and paying attention to earlier philosophers that had genetically identical brains to what we have today, and who were sharing wise things. And then there was the capture of that by political forces that distorted it for fucked up purposes. And it's both. And there's heaps of fucked up, dumb, irrelevant stuff. And there's actually heaps of really deep, insightful things. And I would neither want to have to keep the bathwater nor throw the baby out, nor be bound to the previous babies as the best baby we can get, right? So I think that when the founding fathers are saying there's a need for something like a religious process, is when people think about heaven and hell and some almighty God judging, or they think about reincarnation or something like that, if they're not yet at the kind of level of moral development that can transcend narcissism and care about the subjective experience of others for no rationalized benefit to themselves, then thinking about reward and punishment for themselves in an afterlife is a nice way to smuggle in infinity, right? It's a nice way to at least get them to, for their own self-benefit, think about things that in the rational calculus right now, they can't see how serves their own self-benefit. But there's something in a transcendental operator of what is more meaningful to me than my own life? And do I have a sense of life with a capital L, like all of life, all of experience that is more than just my experience? And where beyond choice-making calculus, I have some unfuckwithable virtues and ethical senses. Of course, the religions are not adequate, and of course they have heaps of nonsense, but I think the need for a transcendental operator is clear. So then the question of what do transcendental operators that are not irrational gibberish, that is also bound to bad concepts, what does that look like moving forward? And I think we could look at this in a way that would both clarify and reify previous religions into healthier versions of themselves, as well as offer a post-religion, post-science philosophy that includes and transcends the meaningful parts of both pre-modern and modern.